My name's Elizabeth Church. Welcome to everyone. I represent the Maritimes on the Oxfam Canada board, and Oxfam Canada is delighted to be co-sponsoring this evening's event with CCEPA, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs. Yes, this is the first time we've co-sponsored with CCEPA, and we look forward to more joint ventures. CCEPA is a joint venture between St. Mary's University and the Atlantic School of Theology. It's well known for its thoughtful, thought-provoking, and often provocative lecture series. And tonight's talk is part of the Just in Time series. After the talk, please join us at the reception just outside the hall here. And I've also been asked to ask everyone to fill out your evaluation sheets, which are in front of you. Now, I recognize many of you as friends and supporters of Oxfam, but for those of you who are new to Oxfam, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about what we do. Oxfam is an international development organization. Our goals are clear. We work with the most marginalized, women and children who live in poverty. And we work in many ways. One, we provide humanitarian relief for people who are in crisis. Right now, we're supporting people in Zimbabwe, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, Darfur, Somalia, and many other countries. We also support long-term development work and advocacy and work with partners in 28 countries around the world, in the Americas, in Southern Africa, the Horn of Africa, and South Asia. Oxfam Canada is also an active campaigner in Canada, raising the awareness of Canadians about the rights issues internationally, and also encouraging and pushing our government to live up to its commitments in the areas of international aid, and also to take a leadership role in supporting women's rights and addressing climate change. And if you're not already involved in Oxfam, there are many, many ways to become involved. You can become a member, you can volunteer, you can donate, and you can campaign. And there'll be people from Oxfam here if you'd like to talk about this after the talk. Our speaker tonight, Joanna Kerr, is the Director of Policy and Outreach with Oxfam Canada. Joanna is the former Executive Director of the Association for Women's Rights and Development. She's been a consultant and advisor to the Stephen Lewis Foundation, the UN Trust Fund on Violence Against Women, and the Women Initiative for Gender Justice. And she's published extensively on women's rights and economic justice. She joined Oxfam Canada last year, and there was a tremendous amount of excitement when she joined us because of her reputation, the work that we knew that she did. Her work on gender and economic justice, and her advocacy for women globally. We are already seeing the benefits of her vision with our new campaign that was launched this spring. Stop Harming, Start Helping, Women's Rights and Climate Change. Joanna is committed, knowledgeable, passionate, and makes a compelling case for why we need to address these vital issues. We're delighted to have Joanna here this evening. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good evening. It's a pretty beautiful night out there, and you're all here. And I'm sure some of you are a little skeptical about a talk that's called The Burden of Climate Change on Women. So I want to take you on a little bit of a skeptic's journey. Does climate change have a differential impact on women that it does on men? And what does that have to do with right now? Because as I understand, this is a series called Just in Time about current issues. So I think the best way to start off my talk is to share with you the story of Martina. And Martina is an Oxfam partner. And she's based in Uganda. And I think the best way for you to start this journey is to hear Martina's story.
Iya kan baru diama takkan nete punya ko ba nak magmuak kawin muak wir nyele lal to ya ba kakari ya nyele lenu ya unti nyele lenu tama ya kamar ya nyele lenu tadi tamar ya rato anya ko nyele ga unya ku ya tamar Ala ye karre jigni aja kan. Apalagi nyabuni na jok nyabuni nyeru ko na ke ken kan garupan ya tantar buni ngi todo nya kilo chogin to kanan karo kilo chogin. Kana laptop ay kedua kok. Foto aja. Ini kita aja kan kita polongnya kalau aja kita tara kada nowi. Alalanya maning karung apa yang karung gua lah patatnya aku. Aku bang ini aja ada betul kan dah punya. Ni pede mani kor kayente. Ararin gitu agak taya kadnya rau kuju. Elozi kuku tanga to kan elodere ada na ina mernya mertina. Ata kala wanya ne ga merang mo ne ki. Ninda dang tur. Aduh tur ninda. Ne wontoria ko pakana gya. Eta pitalanya kurecha, tamarni ko ngintanya kurena gai. Magi pun matan, lagi jaga wadar tanya kar. Angapa tak nyarotang ta babono tu ya kali. Yoko kinchana panai. Ni bore ni dorong nang doya dang. Ara ka gipide ke ya katar. Yoko kinchai. E boy kir bone amane ya kolongo cho irano woi bagala par nya kai. Tatama nya ketama ko na kililingi kilingi. Kiliko na ka. Anapa ne lo chognor atu dadaun kemalua ana mana edo awaranya kidran lara lo nyaka ngimwa kana kala bien dari apa ni jamnya lo peto do nya kiru ame ko kinyo ban dong na ye tamara na pana kara mo ye ko ngi ya dore patamara be ro mitin nya kiru kidi cha ndo ngitara na ra kidi ko ba nyuru nya kiru ko nya ku yo to da ke kipi Pedro orang mau apa? Hanya macam kau Apa cu? Hanya macam kau ada. Hati gudi. Kita nyama. Malah kau. Nyama nak nyam. Kita lakukan. Nanti aja. Kita kan mau nyakitin tunggu pitodang, nabo itu per. Apa yang itu kau nyakui? Auro barjang dia nak kalau nyakitin kau na. Nyawa ni kecamit dia pakai dengan nyakitin gue kini. Yoko kita ngede lu gue juga kini cuy. Aina kini nyana. Aratu ya kan dengan kipi, tamas.
So Martina's story is pretty compelling. And for a lot of people, it drives it home that this is happening to women right now. Climate change is having an impact on people's lives as we speak. And it's also something that I want to talk about in relation to an international food crisis that is happening as we speak, as well as the global economic crisis. So we're going to try this evening to link those three together. As I said earlier, this isn't going to be the funniest speech I've ever given. I have been known to share a few laughs, but what's going on right now is there is a pretty strong sense of urgency that we have to think very, very differently about what we're doing here and what we're doing abroad. And I will admit to you, I am very, very new to the climate change field and to environmental work. I have spent my career since the early 90s working on gender equality and women's rights. And I was a bit skeptical myself about work around climate change. And in the sense that I thought, wow, that's bad out there, but really, I hope you're doing something about it, but I got to work on women's rights. I mean, there's just not enough people that are concerned with gender equality. But once I've recognized how much of an obstacle climate change is to the advancement of women's rights and to the advancement of human rights and the kind of humanitarian crisis that is unfolding at this particular moment, I realize that there's no moment to waste where all of our concerns around social justice, human rights, the environment actually have to fold together at a time like this. So if you are a skeptic, you might say, is Martina's story just particular to Uganda? No, it's not. In fact, 30% of the developing world gets its energy from wood. Countries like Tanzania or Nepal, 80% of energy comes from wood. So women who have to work further and further, and very often risk their own security and their lives to work to walk great distances. It's a huge impact on women's lives and women's time. Next slide. The other incredible thing is that natural disasters actually kill more women than men. Oxfam did research after the Asian tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami, I should refer to it as. Now, while that was created by an earthquake, that was not a climate-related disaster, it was so shocking to learn that it was 4-to-1 in terms of female to male deaths. So how is this possible? Why did that happen? Well, women were holding on to their clothes. They were holding on to their children. They didn't have access to bicycles, to the transportation. Many of them just kept rushing to the beach to look for their menfolk in the fishing boats to come out, and we're not getting to safe land. And so while the tsunami was not climate related, we do know from a study by the London School of Economics of 141 recent disasters, it showed decisively that more deaths were female. And it had to do with really women's social and economic rights and gender norms. This particular photo behind me was just taken a couple of weeks ago. That was Cyclone Isla, just a couple of weeks ago. Next slide. Oh. Okay, Mac, PC didn't talk to each other. I'm so sorry, but what you would have seen is this, right? That's what you would have seen. That is essentially the projection of the number of climate-related deaths that international agencies are projecting around the world. We think that in the coming years, an estimated number of 325 million people are going to be seriously affected by climate-related disasters. And what is of huge concern is, in fact, there is less than 1% of the funding available to deal with these humanitarian disasters. So we've got a climate change creating humanitarian crisis, increasing vulnerability of women in a time of a global economic crisis, and there's no funding. Climate change is seriously affecting people living in cities too. It's not just rural communities like Martina's story. And that has to do with flooding, a lot of contaminated water. Contaminated water is actually a cause of a huge number of deaths. And so waterborne diseases like dengue, it's actually killing about 2 million people every year. But when it comes to health-related issues, we all know that health care really is the domain of women. From Delhi to Johannesburg, women are the unpaid caregivers. They are the millions of grandmothers in Uganda or Joburg that organizations like Stephen Lewis Foundation works with, or of course Oxfam Canada. They are treating the kids and the adults with HIV and AIDS. They are the women that are trying to find alternative work arrangements in order to take care of kids and family members that are getting sick. But this is not to say that men are not being affected by climate chaos. I think one of the most striking examples is of many men who are leaving West Africa in boats. This very rapid emigration seeking immigration to Europe. And much of that is stress on the land, due to stress on the land, and not a livelihood that men can find, and they are leaving. But men and women, but men also are very much being affected by the kinds of conflicts that are being created by the reduction of water and natural resources. And that is being sped up through climate-related disasters. The real point, though, in terms of looking at the impact on men and women, we're not talking about polar bears here, we are talking about human beings, is that climate change is going to impact on those most vulnerable and those most poor. And what we know with Oxfam Canada is that actually gender is the most significant predictor of poverty. Now I just want to flick to the global economic crisis for a second. Another horrible number. New estimates have just come out that because of what's happened since September, 105 million more people have been pushed below the poverty line. And I don't know how many of you have heard about the Make Poverty History campaign. Yeah, Make Poverty History. Basically, what that will do will unravel 7 years of poverty reduction strategies. That's almost the entire Make Poverty History campaign. We have to go back to ground zero there. But in terms of the global economic crisis, here too we can see very specific impacts on women. Job cuts. So I was just last month in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. And as you will know, many factories are closing. Factories dominated by women, mostly garment and footwear jobs. And women are being just laid off. And there are vast numbers of job losses around the world. And now, while in North America, they're predicting that more jobs will be lost to men, right now the ILO is saying that far more jobs will be lost to women. Now, this isn't the first economic crisis. This is making so much news because it's probably the biggest crisis to capitalism. But we have had economic crises before. If you look at the Argentina peso crisis, just think back to the 90s, the Asian financial crisis. And there again, we saw how many women lost their jobs, a lot of manufacturing and service sector jobs. But the job creation projects are usually going to men. So while we talk about the he-cession here, not the recession, we are seeing these shovel-ready capital expenditure jobs. And we're seeing that around the world. The kind of emphasis on a male breadwinner bias, that if we're going to get communities and economies back to work, we need to create male jobs. And so the dilemma is actually that while men are out of work, women are picking up 2 or 3 jobs. So huge amounts of stresses on families. Incredible increase in violence against women that we are seeing. We see that within any economic downturn, spikes in violence against women. Remittances is another thing that we're seeing right now. So remittances, of course, are when people migrate for work, they send money home to families. Remittances are absolutely a huge injection of cash to poor countries. I think the number is, women constitute half of the migrant workers. Half of them will lose they're likely to lose their jobs around the world. But for countries like Sri Lanka, Philippines, Bangladesh, in fact, the remittances that women send back are the majority of the financial flows that go into those countries. The other thing, of course, is governments have less money right now. And so whether it's Canada, whether it's Zimbabwe, there is just going to be massive cuts in public expenditures, and of course there are going to be cuts in development aid. And we're already hearing, particularly Western governments, who, you peg your overseas development assistance to your GDP. Your GDP goes down, and your aid flows go down. And so already, just the need to make up that shortfall is billions of dollars. And so, what does this have to do with women? Is there any gender specificity around the reduction in aid flows? Yes, in particular to public expenditure around health and education. These are sectors that are getting the hardest hit, and we know when those sectors get cut, the burden basically falls on women's flexible time, with women's labor. But what about the food crisis? Do you remember that? About a year ago, a little bit more than that, it was, the headline was that, food riots are being sparked by the international food crisis. So what happened? It was supposed to be this unprecedented crisis that was unfolding, huge global imbalances in terms of food shortages. So did it go away? I was hoping it went away. That this just, if it's not in the news anymore, we don't have to worry about it. In fact, it's still there. It's very much there. And it's really that the headlines have been drowned out because of the global economic crisis, because of a crisis in capitalism. That takes the headlines. But in fact, the food crisis is still there. And many people predict it's actually going to get worse. Now, there was a blip there for a second where food and fuel prices have gone down. But what the food crisis is really right now is that there's just this huge new population who can't afford to buy food. So you have the International Network for Economic and Social Rights, that is saying, actually, there's going to be 1 billion more people that are going to be hungry because of this food crisis. 1 billion. And we're hearing that basically so many families are surviving because women are eating less. Calorie intake is decreasing by females, or mothers are only giving more highly nutritious food to men. Hunger, unfortunately, is extraordinarily gender biased around the world. So why do we have the food crisis? Why is it as bad as how did we get here? Well, there's a couple of reasons. There has essentially been a lack of investment for the past 20 years in food security by governments around the world. There has not been an investment in agricultural research or extension. There has been, of course, I think there's a new slide needed, a huge growth in agribusiness, and the buy-up of land for the commercialization of food. And, of course, how much of that land is turning to ethanol production to address the dilemmas of climate change, but also a food crisis that is being brought around by erratic weather patterns. So, as I'm talking to women in El Salvador, we hear about all the factory losses, and then all the rural women say, we don't know when to plant anymore. We don't know when the rains are going to come. And very often when they come too strong, and they wash away all the seeds. And they've seen these changes getting worse and worse and worse. But food production is just getting harder and harder and harder for rural people. And the kinds of ways in which to adapt are becoming more important. So I'm about to get to there. So, yeah. Okay, so we've got a climate crisis. We have a food crisis. We have an economic crisis. As someone who's fundamentally concerned about the rights of women, human rights around the world, what do? Do you freeze from fear? Do you just start at home, start local? Where do you begin? Or do you use this crisis as an opportunity? And do you use this crisis as a real opportunity to talk about, in new ways, a failure of so many systems, a failure of so many of our behaviors, things that we've allowed, a system built upon the exploitation of women's labor. This is, if ever there was a time, to take advantage of a crisis, many who say this will be the crisis of our generation. And if we don't take this time and use it as an opportunity, then when will we? So what do? Well, the answer to me is both incredibly simple and incredibly complex. The simple answer is it just can't be business as usual for anybody. For any single one of us in this room, it cannot be business as usual. The complex answer, though, is we need to get at these root causes and find forms of development that are gender sensitive, that are climate sensitive, that are sustainable, and create lifestyles around them that support that model of development. The problem being is that we have a very short amount of time. Very short amount of time for such unprecedented amount of systemic change that we need to bring about. And we need political will at the highest levels. And there's a tendency for us not to agree. We need to bring about unprecedented amount of consensus. And there is a tendency for us not to agree. So when we talk about climate change, we often talk about mitigation and adaptation. So let's quickly talk about mitigation. So what is mitigation? Mitigation is unfortunately just too soft a word. It's really soft and sweet. Mitigate. That term, mitigation, is what the scientists are referring to as bringing about a massive lowering in carbon emissions. The science is saying that carbon emissions can peak no longer than 2015, and then there has to be a dramatic drop in carbon emissions to below 1990 levels. So 2015 is just over 2,000 days. 2,000 days. Now, you put it in those terms, 2,000 days, and you just want to say, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves, I'm going to stop everything that I was doing, and I'm going to focus on getting our governments, our leaders, to wake up and smell the coffee. Now, you can stand over there and say, okay, but maybe the science is wrong, but for God's sake, what if they're right? And more of them are right. So we got 2,000 days. 2,000 days. Tomorrow we'll only have 1,999 days. This stuff keeps me up at night. It keeps me up at night. So much of the mitigation response is around, technology. It's around new technology. And of course, that is a major, major part of the answer. We need new technologies so fast. However, technology isn't the solution. In fact, there's some very interesting surveys that have been done about how to deal with climate change and differences of opinions between men and women. More men think that technology is the answer. More women actually think it has to do with behavior change and changing our lifestyles. Fact is, it has to be both, right? We have to agree on that. It's not an either-or situation. It is going to be new technologies, and it's going to be very extreme behavior changes. And I don't know if any of you heard of the story of stuff? The little video and the story to stuff. Yeah, like you show that to every teenager you know. Every kid I can put in front of a computer, I show them that 20-minute video about consumption and how our consumption patterns are leading to the kind of climate crisis that we have, built upon an economic system that is built upon the exploitation of women's labor. Now, many people ask me, but is overpopulation the problem? Is overpopulation the problem? Well, this is a very tricky thing, right? It's a very, very tricky thing. Because when you ask that, for many people, overpopulation, that question comes from a kind of racist, xenophobic, and anti-poor people position. There's too many poor women having black babies. That's what that's coming from. So I have a real problem with that question when people ask me about overpopulation. However, the fact is that the majority of women around the world do not have reproductive rights. They do not have access to family planning. In El Salvador, there are more girls between the age of 10 and 18 having babies than there are women over 20. There are more teenage pregnancies than there are women over 20. There is no access to family planning, to sex ed, to reproductive services. And the fact that still today, 500,000 women die in childbirth each year. Completely preventable. The science is there, the knowledge is there, but this goes on. Okay, so if we can marry a reproductive rights agenda and a climate change agenda, because you give women reproductive rights, and fertility will go down. That happens because people will choose. If they have access, they will choose. Families will choose to have fewer children. So it is controversial, but if we can marry a reproductive rights and a climate change agenda, okay, I'm all for it. Food security strategies. I think that's the next slide. There we go. So the agricultural sector is there's volumes written on the ways in which we can change agriculture to be much more sustainable, the ways in which animal husbandry uses up too much fertile land, much more efficient use of water and irrigation practices. Fact is, 60 to 80% of the world's food is produced by women. And women are being cut out of the formula every single time. If we actually gave women more access to land and gave them more appropriate technology and extension services, food production would go up. It's just, to me, it's a wonderful quote by a friend of mine, Needy Tandon, who's a real expert on this issue. She says, for all the lip service that institutions like the World Bank pay to gender and women's empowerment, believe me, I've been there in those rooms with them, the fact remains that mere crumbs of support are offered today to rural women, and that only when there's some return on investment. So in order to support women in leading change at the grassroots level, there needs to be focused attention, organizational capacity, and resources systematically dedicated and packaged to support rural women's needs. Women who both secure household energy and produce crops could benefit from food-fuel intercropping to meet their community's food and energy needs. But at the crux of this all, naturally, is women's access to farmland. Let's talk about adaptation. So, a major part of the solution, and this is an area of campaigning that Oxfam is very involved in, is giving poor people, particularly poor women, the means to adapt to climate change. And in the climate change world, silly as it is, there's this huge debate. Should it be focused on adaptation or should it be focused on mitigation? Or an organization like Oxfam shouldn't be talking about adaptation because we really have to deal with this 2,000 days thing. But you got to do both, because what's happening to Martina is happening right now. And so particularly women living in poor countries and communities need the resources to adapt to climate change right now. This is a solar cooker. This is solar power. There are technologies out there that women are asking for and women need to adapt to climate change right now. The problem is it's a little bit of this magic bullet dilemma, right? Technology being the answer, but it isn't. And particularly the way in which so many development institutions, not ours, but many development institutions impose technology. We impose technology. Here, try this fantastic new solar cooker. And yet, any adaptation to technology needs accompaniment. You know when you got your new BlackBerry, like, how the hell does this thing work, I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have. Oh, you see, you're anti-BlackBerry. But that kind of technology needs, any kind of new technology needs accompaniment. You need activists and grassroots development workers in communities to enable technology to take hold. And the challenge for me is what we're doing around technology and adaptation is we're doing all the same things that we were doing just around poverty eradication. We come up with these one-size-fits-all technology approaches. We come up with these one-size-fits-all approaches to poverty eradication. The fact is, the reasons why women are poor and men are poor are different. The reasons to get, the ways to get women out of poverty and men out of poverty are different. You're looking skeptical, Mr. Man in the green shirt there. Yeah, it's okay. I was skeptical too about this. But the fact is that most poverty is created because of lack of access to productive resources. What are productive resources? Education, land, capital, credit, networks, mobility, the opportunity to be mobile with transportation. And throughout the world, no matter where you go, women have less access and control over productive resources than men. So the same thing, you bring in technology, we have to be very cognizant of the kinds of inequalities that exist in terms of productive resources. So we can't find magic bullets like this without this kind of deep analysis of power and discrimination. Because already we've seen adaptation projects that have been thrown at women. Here, women, here are some adaptation projects. And like a huge reforestation program in Indonesia. Indonesian Prime Minister's wife gave this huge ceremonial thing to give away. Well, great. So women have no time. They're already they have a total burden of time. And now they've got to take care of the community forest. So how is that fair that we're dumping adaptation projects on women? All right. So I'm going to wrap up here. Well, let's see what the next slide is, because at the end, okay. The other thing that we're really clear about is that the dilemma here is that so many people in the climate justice debate, the economic justice debate, they want to just victimize women. Women as victims, women as victims. And for many policymakers, that's really the only way they want to hear, oh, poor women. We got to save them. Poor women, look at that. But quite frankly, women are agents of change, and they are leading some of these movements for change, but they don't have a seat at the table. Any of these major climate change negotiations, women, particularly Indigenous women who have so much knowledge and have been working on these issues for decades, they don't have a seat at the table. So we have got to support women's leadership and decision-making around these pieces. And keep going, keep going. It's also about the next generation of leaders. I mean, that's the other thing that we know about gender equality. You know, it's not that sexy, but education is definitively one of the most important aspects that have brought about women's empowerment and have such a huge impact on communities. And so to what extent are we ensuring the kind of, I know here in Halifax that's not a problem, but in most parts of the world, the kind of discrimination that girls still feel in terms of getting good education. So where are we going to pay for all this? And so that goes back to that whole economic crisis thing. What are we doing in terms of progressive taxation systems? What are we doing about tax havens, right? Like I was told the other day that Mr. Irving, is this right? He keeps all his funds offshore in Bermuda. He keeps his money in Bermuda, in trusts in Bermuda. The wealthiest Canadian families keep their money offshore so that they have a one-time tax and that's it. So, that's the thing. There's so much money out there, and this is this time at this moment in 2009, with 2,000 days left, that we actually have to be thinking collectively as citizens about where we're going to find the money to deal with an economic crisis and a climate crisis that is essentially going to be a humanitarian crisis. So what are you going to do? What can you do? Well, the tiniest little thing, if you haven't already done it, is sign the petition that I'm sure Brian has put faithfully outside the door. So if you don't believe in women's rights and you don't believe in climate change, you don't have to sign it. But we need Canadians to talk to this government because we've just had climate change talks in Bonn. Again, our Stephen Harper government is trying to block advancement. Like, how is this possible? I don't get it. So we all, and I know I've talked to all my conservative sisters in Ottawa. They want to hear from soccer moms. They want to hear from business people. We need as many people to be talking about climate change from as many different perspectives as we possibly can. So the tiniest thing you can do is sign a petition, but if you can go meet your member of parliament, if you can just talk to people who are the unsuspected allies of the climate change movement, you gotta do it. Because our government, really, in the global scheme of things, they're a problem. So I'm just going to end. I mean, I know this was a speech about doom and impending doom. But I guess for me, the only thing that gets me out of bed every morning is hope. And look at me, I'm getting a little bit emotional about that. But, I take a page out when I heard Obama say, God, Mr. President, this just must be the worst time to be a president. And he said, in fact, this is the best time to be a president. And I actually believe Right now, this is the best time ever to be a global active citizen because it's here. The crisis is upon us. If you don't feel it, you got to pick up your newspaper. You just got to read a few facts. This is the time to wake up this nation, to wake up that we are global citizens and we have to do something because we've got 1,999 days. Thank you. And I'm now going to invite up Dr. Sheila Brown, who's the Executive Director of CCEPA, to moderate the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna. When Joanna said earlier in her remarks, a comment she'd made earlier in the evening, that this was perhaps a rather gloomy presentation and certainly wasn't humorous, I think you will agree with me it was nonetheless a presentation delivered with great passion, with great feeling for the problems that confront us, and some statistics that are really quite chilling. This is an opportunity for us all to engage as citizens in this debate. One of the things that characterizes the Canadian Centre for Ethics Public Affairs presentations, whether they are on our own or with partners such as Oxfam, is the opportunity for a question and answer session. Do you have a question?
I'm Judy Guernsey. I'm a professor at Dalhousie University, and I want to thank you for your presentation this evening. I'm wondering, so this is something obviously that Oxfam as Canada is really taking up as a charge. And you've just recently come into your position. Perhaps you can outline for us what are some of the strategies that how you are moving this agenda forward. If you could give us some of the specific strategies and maybe there's some new things that you're doing. I'd certainly be interested to hear about that. Thank you.
Well, that's one of the very interesting things about working for an organization like Oxfam, because it is connected to some hallways of power because of a confederation of 14 Oxfams, from Oxfam Great Britain being the biggest and most powerful. Oxfam Canada is a small affiliate, but all of the Oxfams have engaged in climate change and will be working on this issue past Copenhagen, which is the big, for those of you who don't know, the big UN meeting that's happening in Copenhagen in December. And that's at the end of 2 years of very, very important negotiations. So if we don't actually get a fair deal in Copenhagen, we're in a bit of trouble. So all of the Oxfams are engaged in very explicit lobbying, trying to put the human face of climate change onto the debate, linking mitigation and adaptation, and trying to raise the amount of money that is being available for adaptation. Our goal with Oxfam Canada is really to link the issues of women's rights and climate change, because for so many women in the movement, they're not really as aware of how interconnected these issues are. For so many of the organizations that we are partnering with across the country, they are environmental organizations that are not necessarily looking at the impact of climate change on poor communities around the world. They're certainly not looking at it from a women's rights perspective. So we are trying to amplify people's understanding, particularly talking about it in terms of humanitarian crisis. Oxfam has put out a wonderful report just recently called The Right to Survive, which basically documents many of the climate-related natural disasters. And so there's a public education component, there's a lobbying component. We're working with volunteers, with campus groups. There's going to be a huge push come September to December to really be getting out there and getting as many Canadians to do something to get political about this issue. We are certainly asking as many of us to change our own consumption patterns. That's the very least we can do. And that, I know, is also a huge debate. When shouldn't we just be out there and stopping the tar sands? What is recycling really going to do? But yet, for so many people, we have to do something, and there's so much we can be doing right now. So, at a global policy level, very, very active at grassroots engagement, trying to really have conversations with as many people about the ways in which this, climate change is a human rights and a humanitarian and a women's rights issue right now.
Thank you again for your wonderful speech. It was much appreciated. And I really liked the fact that you brought up reproductive rights for women, and that poor people all over the world that are having children, and it's not the responsibility of people in the West who are thinking about their decisions when it comes to having children. And now we look at some China, for example, with the policy of the one child. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, or your feelings are as a Western country like Canada, and mandating a policy like that, or where that would fit into, because it's not just having children, it's the having of the children, and then the environmental impact that has.
I'll be very blunt. I don't. I've seen the effects of the one-child policy in China. I did a lot of work in China in the 90s, so I don't actually believe in any kind of repressive policy like that. I actually believe that you start with women's empowerment and you give women choice. Bottom line, I think that we have, as a responsibility in Canada, and any rich country just has a huge responsibility to do in terms of our consumption. And the carbon footprint is in the north. It is not in the global south at all. But the thing is that those questions keep coming at me. Well, what about overpopulation? Well, fine then. If you're going to be stuck on that, then let's focus on women's reproductive rights around the world, because that will solve part of the problem. That's the only reason I raise it. But ultimately, I think our consumption patterns need to be legislated. I mean, I just moved from Toronto to Ottawa, and I am shocked in Ottawa that there is no, and I think you have a really good program here, a green program. In Ottawa, there is no green bin. No green bin. So imagine every single parliamentarian in Ottawa never has to make the choice at any time of the day to say, is this compostable? The recycling program in Ottawa is just deplorable. And I left Toronto when we were getting taxed for garbage. You could only fill your bin, and anything more than that was too much. So it's not enough, but I could see how behavior could change overnight when all my neighbors said, forget it, there's no way I can put my trash in that tiny little thing. Everybody did it in 2 weeks. They got it. So yes, our government has a huge, huge responsibility to both subsidize good behavior, solar panels for our water heaters. There's a great program that far too people will actually take advantage of, and we don't come down hard on the polluters. Bottom line.
Well, my question picks up on some of the themes from the last question. You're talking about governments in prosperous nations using nudges and incentives to change behavior. Do you think that's enough? I'm wondering whether institutions like parliamentary democracy might be getting in the way. What do you think of that? Is it possible that a more authoritarian government is necessary in order to make the changes that are required? Even more authoritarian, yes. Or do you think it's possible, given democratic and parliamentary institutions, to do something that's really a very major transformation? I think the only analogies or examples might be mobilizing for war. And that happens only when it's right at your doorstep.
Well, this is a provocative question, audience. What do I think about authoritarianism? I mean, does it come to that? Is it an either or? I'm not sure. Well, what do you think? What do you think?
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
I hope not.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's, the media can be marshaled in very, very effective ways, and if people want to care, and I think it's not about allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom and 1,000 different ideas. I think there is a convergence happening, and I think we need to be more clever in the ways in which we are making the links in our community halls, in our universities. I mean, I'm hearing incredible things that environmental and international development programs and environmental programs, actually, I don't know if the university's here, but out in BC, these two programs actually never talk to each other. That you can take an entire thing of international development and never do anything on the environment. I feel that we're in so many silos that the media, popular culture, could actually do something to transform this. I think Al Gore's movie did a huge service to this, and I think there just needs to be a much greater buy-in by more of us, and stop being so skeptical. And I guess I'm just very fearful of anything that's authoritarian that has that kind of can have a very, very negative impact. I guess this is a dialogue. If this is what we need, 1,999 days, and we need we need to do this. But, I mean, our government is doing not a fraction of what it needs to do. And that I just can't, that I can't believe. That I can't believe how many of us are not doing more that we can be doing. And so I don't know what it is. Is it the information isn't out there, or is that we don't believe it? Is that the science naysayers have been really effective, or that it's over there, it's still not here? What is it? What is it about these crises that people don't feel that they need to do something about it? What do you think?
No, I don't know. These are the important questions. My concern is this. If the planet is warming, and it's warming as a result of human behavior, and this human behavior is not going to cease drastically, then ecological catastrophe. Only someone who has a lot of power, the guns behind it, can rally people and stop this, perhaps. I don't know. That's my worry. My worry is I don't want to trade the limited amount of democracy and freedom that we have. I'd like to extend it, actually, but I don't want to trade it for authoritarianism, unless it's absolutely necessary. And I wonder whether indeed it is necessary. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the thing to do is just enjoy freedom and democracy as we all perish.
So just following on that, in terms of people in power who have the capability for change, I'm curious to see what your thoughts are about the role of business and corporate social responsibility. This is a huge thing that we're seeing, and there's a lot of contention and a lot of praise on both sides of it for this.
Yeah. I mean, I am, so around my dining room table I sit with my sister many times, who's the director of marketing for a very big company. And she knows how to market, and she's brilliant at it. And we often talk about the power of marketing in this day and age that has compelled so many people to buy and do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And corporations are very aware of the ways in which they can use their brand power and greenwash, whatever you want to say. In this day and age, the fact is that so many more of us are influenced by corporations than we are influenced by governments, and pop culture is so heavily influenced by the role of corporations. So, what do I think about corporate social responsibility? I'm nervous about the ways in which they can brand with green, the greenification of certain things, but it's really just a marketing ploy. My sister and I had a very long conversation about how she was going to greenify her company, and it's incredible to me how cleverly she could pull that one off without really fundamentally changing anything. But I also think that business has to be at the table. And business has to be at a table. And it worries me how purer than thou so many in the social justice community won't even be sitting down with business because, corporations are beneficiaries of globalization, and they'll never think differently. If it means getting corporations to the table because there is some money to be made in new green technologies, so be it. And the same way corporations are asking governments to legislate pollution, and many have said, the governments need to be doing much, much more. The Canadian government needs to be doing much, much more. So I guess the simple answer is this consensus is going to be very, very difficult. But I think we need, if popular culture, if the demand is there, if citizens are calling out for it, corporations will come along. But we're not enough of us are crying out for it. Not enough.
Just in response to that, I'm just wondering, is the fact that we want to buy things that are marketed to us as green, is that action potential? Like, that's something, because I feel the same way, but I often wonder about the potential for social marketing given our drive to pay for things that make us feel better.
Yeah, well, and thankfully that's where the economic crisis came in. I mean, now, it's hip to recycle. It's hip to wear recycled clothes. I mean, how long is that going to last? But at the same time, I sat with those women in El Salvador who said, when are women in North America going to start buying again? Because we want our jobs back. It's really complicated. It's really, really complicated. And so for me, so for so many of us, it's this conjuncture of these three things. We have to use them to rethink the economic model. If our economic system is not built on a model to support human needs and humanity, then what are we doing? And until we figure out a way to displace corporate interests in a way that's only about a certain type of profit, we're doomed. And it's to me, this is the moment. I guess I just feel more than ever that this is a tsunami about to hit, and if we don't wake up, we'll perish in a democracy.
To be honest, I feel like we actually almost missed the moment, because if you look at the news right now, they're saying, people are spending a little bit more now and things are stabilizing. So really I feel like that opportunity we had to really talk about it has passed, because now we've sort of forgotten about it and gone back to spending. But you actually touched on what I was going to ask, in that, yes, we all want to consume less, and that seems to be the smartest thing to do, but a lot of people will be negatively affected, and a lot of factory jobs will be lost. And it was just in the news a couple of days ago, like you were saying, we're not spending, they're not making things. So in the short term, what do we do when 80% of the world, they need those jobs, but we also need to spend less? So I don't know. How do we address that in the short term?
Yes, social safety nets. There's got to be a support for public health and social insurance. I mean, none of these economies have been built on these models, and every country has to create social safety nets. And there has been a disincentive throughout the world, basically purported by the World Bank and IMF, that you cannot create these kinds of systems if you cannot afford them. And so we now, of course, deficits are in, so maybe we all can afford to have social safety nets. But that ultimately has to be the answer for every single economy. You have to build in insurance schemes, social safety nets to survive shocks and crises. If you look at any kind of intra-household analysis of what happens to families who are hit by shocks, it can very well be years and years and years before they recover from that kind of crisis. If you look at the work around HIV and AIDS, and when another person falls ill, and the kind of shock to the family that happens, it takes so incredibly long to come back. We're just not thinking about Social Security and insurance and safety nets in ways that are legitimate and pro-capitalist, because they're supposed to be, that's communism and socialism. So that, to me, that's a very simple answer, and to ask of that is, to me now, this is the time that we're out there asking for it, and we need development dollars to be reinforcing them, and we need to find the other money, new forms of money out there to. Progressive taxation, all sorts of revenue. I mean, even the poorest countries have incredibly wealthy people that keep their money in tax havens. So it's the ways in which we structure our economies and our social systems.
Thank you very much, Joanna. You have convinced me that there are many big things I cannot do, but to change my consumption pattern is something I can and must begin to do. I'd like to ask you to give me some names of the geographical areas in the world where climate change is already impacting people like Martina. Can you do that? Which areas in the world are already suffering very much the way
it's all over. I mean, Hurricane Katrina was a climate-related disaster. You're seeing the droughts. You're seeing the droughts here of Uganda. Look at the islands of the Pacific that are disappearing. This is a global phenomenon. So, if you want many more specifics around the humanitarian crisis, I highly recommend you pick up the Right to Survive report that can give you. But this is everywhere. This is the repeated hurricanes that are bashing the southern U.S. coast, and These are the wealthy homes that are falling off the cliffs of California. This is what's happening now. Now, in terms of poor communities, it's just about anywhere where you've seen recent droughts, recent floods. Mozambique gets floods every single year. The rains in southern Africa have just been screwed up for years. Bangladesh, which has always had floods, but they've just gotten more and more severe. Now, there's been a huge number of resources put in to support women to prepare for disaster. It's called disaster risk preparedness, and there's a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of community organizing that's been going on around disaster risk preparedness. That little video that we showed you, there's another wonderful little story by a Bangladeshi woman who's now the head of her disaster community. And so now when the cyclones hit in Bangladesh, they're getting some more severe, but there are fewer deaths. So I wish I could say it was just a few places, but it'd be everywhere.
Well, thank you very much for your discussion. My name's Janelle Frail, and I work with the Climate Change Center with Clean Nova Scotia. And
you should be up here.
No, definitely not.
I'm not the expert.
But I do appreciate how you're saying it's more of a discussion than a Q&A, because I don't know if I have any questions, but I do have some comments to make.
Great.
So I really appreciate what Oxfam does, and I know a couple of people who work for Oxfam, and I don't ever want the work to stop. But I also just want to make some comments that the climate change impacts are also happening here in Nova Scotia as well. We have to keep this in mind, and also throughout Canada too. Our First Nation communities, they're not getting the support they need, and they're very vulnerable. They're economically poor and underserviced. So to keep that in mind as well. And the saying, think globally, act locally, I also encourage people to think locally and act locally. And I don't know if anyone can provide me with an organization that is Canadian and works for Canadians to adapt, because I find, like, I've done a little bit of research in that aspect, and I haven't found any organization yet what's concentrating on it.
Somebody else has asked me that same question.
Yes, I'm glad Oxfam is, and I'm going to be looking more into that and maybe seeing how Canada can also do the same things, because, we need to. I feel that Canada has a lot of strong mitigation programs, like turn off your lights, and that's very important. But what about adapting? Yeah. So those are just some comments.
Great.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation, too. My name is Peggy Cameron, and just following up on what was being commented here, I think that one of the things that we have to realize is we do have a tremendous vulnerability here in Atlantic Canada to the effects from climate change. And I think we're more vulnerable than we're aware of because of issues like energy security and food security. I think recently, I believe I read that we import about 95% of our food in Nova Scotia now. And I know that we import all of our oil and we import all of most of our coal. And I think you might find this amusing, but I think you were a bit hard on Stephen Harper. Because I don't see.
You think I was hard on Stephen Harper?
Yeah, because I actually don't see that a Liberal government would be very different than what Stephen Harper. I think Stephen Harper.
I didn't say that, though.
No.
You didn't hear me say that.
Yeah, but so I'm just saying I think it's unfortunate to blame Stephen, because I think we've had lots of opportunity to be doing things around Kyoto and living up to our responsibilities for what Canada as a nation should be doing to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So,
well, I'll just blame Stephen then what he's doing on women's rights then. How's that?
Yeah, well, maybe that's a topic for a discussion at another time, but what I would like to say is I think something that Canadians really are anxious to have more discussion about is how we could have electoral reform in Canada and how we could have better voice for all people in Canada who have opinions which are different than just what the two, or what we are presented as being the two mainstream parties in Canada are. And I think that could lead to very interesting discussions around how we would have tax reform and how we would have less of a Canada.Inc. business agenda and how we could be adopting ideas that in Atlantic Canada, we have a lot of expertise in, such as Genuine Progress Index, where we look at full cost accounting.
Yep.
And I guess the grassroots movements in Canada are strong, but our voices aren't heard, whether it's environmental issues, climate change issues, gender equity issues, race issues, our First Nations people, our immigration. And so I think that there's, a fundamental problem in Canada with our electoral system. And just so Nova Scotians are aware, we are one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in Canada, and therefore we are some of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in the world. So we do have an imperative to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And we all, as Canadians and as Nova Scotians, need to be thinking about how can we make a transition to a green economy, and how can we be improving our, for example, transitioning to renewable energy. That was a comment.
Thank you. Excellent.
I'd just like to ask you a question, not make a comment, involving the tourist industry and international tourism, which is highly desired as a source of economic activity, often for women, and at the same time is identified as a major issue in terms of climate change and greenhouse gas production. What do you have to say about that particular dilemma?
But I just, that little point you said, it's also a thing for women, that women benefit from tourism. What was your... I
think it's fair to say that tourism is regarded as an important source of economic activity, and certainly including women in large numbers. Yeah. As servers, there are other aspects of the tourism trade which are don't need to be mentioned.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were getting at.
Well, that definitely is a factor, but it's by no means the only aspect of what we're talking about. We're talking about restaurants, hotels. Mexico right now is desperate for tourists. They're doing everything they can to get tourists to go back. So do you regard that as a dilemma in the sense that it also is a factor in climate change?
Of course. No, absolutely. It's such a huge dilemma, and George Monbiot's book, that chapter on air travel. I mean, he basically throws up his hands. I mean, what do we do? And look at me. I mean, I've been in 35 days. I've slept in 15 beds. I mean, this is how much travel I've been doing. It's my own carbon emissions. It's a terrible dilemma, and so as Oxfam now we're now looking about what are the offsets that are, because there's also big controversy around whether offsets really work and all of these things, and talking to our friends at Climate Action Network and figuring out how all of us are traveling for our meetings, let alone tourism. How do we deal with this very conundrum around flight? No, I think it's I think more people will start looking for green tourist alternatives. I did that this year. I went to Sedona, and on a very green outdoor thing, and the car and everything. But I went through Las Vegas. And I don't think there is a place on the planet that is more anti-environment than Las Vegas. I mean, I didn't sleep the whole night. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of hotel rooms that are being air conditioned in the middle of a desert. And it's just... We got to shut that down. We got to shut it down. It's a huge dilemma. But I do think more people will start seeking alternatives. I do.
Thank you for all your work and for the talk tonight. There's so much one could talk about and ask. I have a couple of points, I guess. The seriousness of the climate disaster, catastrophe that we're looking at, I don't think is appreciated really very much at all. And to a certain extent, I don't blame the public, Canadian or North American public, because we get so little information. And that will lead me to the point and perhaps question I'm going to pose. But in terms of the implications, the IPCC report, the last major report, sorry? Yes, the UN International Climate Change Conference that has been meeting for years and producing. Well, their last report 2 years ago predicted, in terms of food production, up to a 50% decline in crops output for many sub-Saharan African countries. This is a decline that is simply off the charts historically. Most famines are caused, most starvation is caused by prices, but the prices are triggered to high levels from crop reductions of 5, 10, 15% historically. We know that. A 50% decline in crop output is simply off the charts. And these are predictions that 2 years ago were being made for 2020, 11 years from now. The seriousness of this is just incomprehensible. And this is on populations that are at or below subsistence already, even in good times. The potential for conflict is so indescribable that we can't, as a society, in any way be insulated from the consequences of our carbon history and footprints. So it's here, and we need to begin to understand, well, why don't we? I have to say, there's two CBC incidents in the last year that are seared into my mind. The first one was a year ago on the Sunday edition, the supposed good journalism program, Sunday edition on Sunday morning. Michael Enrights had a 2-hour special on the trials and tribulations of air travelers and how they lost their luggage and how prices were exorbitant. 2 hours on the trials, and not a word, not a syllable on the impact of air travel on the rest of the world. So I finally got moved to write in, and did, but and pleaded, along with my first intro, a slight sarcasm comment, I pleaded with them to have a 2-hour program on the impact of climate change, which they have not done. Now, the second item is that 2 months ago, in the House of Commons, C-311, Bill C-311 was finally passed. Third reading, I believe it was. And the CBC, the C-311 is the Climate Accountability Act, which obliges, in law, Canada to meet specific emission reduction targets. They're modest. They're not nearly what's required, but at least it's there, 80% by 2050. And it's in law. Well, I went to the CBC at 6 o'clock news, not a word, and not a word on the 10 o'clock news either, on C-311 being passed. No, how many Canadians would even know what C-311 is? This is such abject failure on the part of our public broadcasting system. We should be all absolutely outraged, and the reason I tend not to write in is because I think it's useless, because I don't think anybody else is going to be writing in. I think we just got to immediately get a movement to force CBC to give the public the information we need. And the sooner the better, because there's Copenhagen coming up with just a key key meeting in December. We should get CBC reporting on the Global Day of Action on October 24th. Most other countries know about the Global Day of Action on the 24th of October, but not here in Canada. So there's so many things. Oxfam is knocking themselves out with work on climate change, so are other organizations. We just need to get working together and informing each other and knowing that there are others concerned and willing to raise our voices.
And thank you for your talk. It was wonderful, actually. My name is Ian Cox. I'm wondering what you think about the role of social media in, the social media outlets such as Twitter or Facebook.
Twitter and Flickr and YouTube, obviously that is a much younger audience is using those social networking tools. And, Oxfam, we just had a Brian O'Neill over there who didn't know what a tweet was, now is tweeting for Oxfam. So, we know that we've got to tweet and retweet and do that. And, for me, this is going to be the most fundamental challenge to movement building that there ever has been. And while some people might dismiss Twitter and those tools, the fact is there is a certain amount of immediacy to Twitter, and the fact is that everybody in the next 5 years will have a cell phone, right? Just about everybody. That's what they're saying. Just about everybody. Just about everybody everywhere. Whether you like it or not, people, the holdouts, you're going to have one. You're going to have one. And in terms of what, Obama's campaign, it was a grassroots movement, but for many people, it was extraordinarily immediate and very personal for them because they had a relationship to Obama as they took him into the White House. The way the blogs, the things that were flashing up, the text messages that were flashing up on people's cell phones, etc. So I've seen way before any of us knew any of this, my friends in South Africa, my friends in the Philippines, my friends in Indonesia were so much further about this. The flash mobs that would happen where, internet would be shut down, but people could get the words out to other people's cell phones and be on the streets demonstrating it within a split second. So I very much believe in the power of these new technologies to get people connected. They are only a tool. But I think that, I don't really care what Demi Moore is wearing today. That's not why I want to tweet. But for many social activists, they are important. So, do you have a hot pursuit on that one?
I do actually. I just think this provides an opportunity to connect frustration with public media to social media. I think too often, and I am guilty of it as well, I don't like cell phones, I don't like Twitter, I think it's stupid, but let's remember that social media is media, and from a communications perspective, what we're looking at is people taking back media sources. People saying, I'm not happy with the coverage or the lack of coverage that my public broadcaster is giving me, and so therefore I'm finding other voices, or I'm transmitting my voice, or I'm transmitting the voice of someone who may not have been able to 10 years ago would have said it to their neighbor, and now they can put it on the internet and say it to the world. We have to remember that it is media as well.
But the other thing about it is that we just did a big, we're interviewing for a media officer at Oxfam Canada, and we just interviewed six people last week, and 5 of them are journalists. And all of them said that very often where they get new stories is that They are searching the internet and they're reading blogs. So the interconnection between mainstream media and social media is much closer connection than we actually think. And so you can be going on and commenting on a CBC and doing your rant right there on cbc.com.org.ca. I should know that. And be ranting away, and sooner or later someone's going to pick up the phone and say, we want you on the National. So be careful what you wish for.
Joanna, you touched on this very briefly in your presentation, but I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit more on the impacts of climate change, especially in terms of resources and conflict, and perhaps the impact that that's having particularly on women. Obviously, it's an issue for everybody, but specifically for women.
So I don't know enough about it. In fact, I've just asked one of my interns to write a paper for me on it, because there is research out there. We know that there are connections, and a lot of people are asking us about it. And I don't know the specifics, other than this is very much, there is a connection. These are trends, but no, I need to get tooled up on that one myself.
Thank you. Just to follow up from Sheila's impassioned plea that we do something and we get the government to do something, I'd like to ask Howard Epstein if he could tell us a little bit about the Nova Scotia Climate Change Action Plan.
The term that Ruth used is the name of a document that actually has been issued by the former provincial government, and there is a climate change action plan that does exist in Nova Scotia, and I don't doubt it will change, it will evolve.
Joanna, I was just wondering if you could comment a bit on the technology gap in terms of green technology. And I think in some ways I'm implying that perhaps it's us that has the catching up to do with the global south. And if you have any thoughts, or am I being too vague?
Yeah, more specific.
Sure. I guess I feel like we, in the global north or in the west, we assume that in the developing world they are the ones who have the catching up to do, especially in terms of technology, because they haven't had the Industrial Revolution and whatnot. But when you look at green technology, I think most of the innovation is coming from the global south, but that we aren't really recognizing that and forming our own adaptation strategies sort of based on a lot of the innovation that's happening. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts or comments on that.
The only stuff that I know really anything about that with some detail around gender equality is around farming and agricultural technology. And that really worries me, the ways in which there is the new alliance between agribusiness and green technology and the food security business, and basically taking away land from women who have actually been using organic means to produce food in very carbon-friendly ways for a very long time. And the way in which that solution is being taken away, just like the way, the U.S. took away, the U.S., sorry, I'm getting a bit tired, like the whole organic, when they named organic farming, and that the tagging of organic was basically taken away from organic farmers and basically relabeled. And so that's the piece that really, really worries me, is the way in which this technology piece is being imposed on those poor women farmers, when in fact so many of them have been asking, and they're very, very clear about what they're asking for in terms of very simple and sustainable green technologies. But there's this, there's this conglomeration, World Bank funded, agribusiness supported, Jeffrey Sachs and for the Millennium Development Goals, the Green Revolution for Africa. That to me is a big worry. So, but I guess for me, I've just seen it for so long doing gender equality work around the world. It's just, they know. They know, they've been asking for the same thing, and the way in which we've been treating them as helpless victims, that we can show them the way. So but I think this is going to be a real challenge in this particular juncture where the technology is going to be imposed. Whereas adaptation might look like nothing like green technology. It might look nothing like that.
We pride ourselves at the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs on finishing promptly, and we try to finish by 9 o'clock, so I am going to draw the formal part of our proceedings to a close. A few final pieces of business we'd like to do. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs hosts a number of programs, often in partnership with other organizations such as Oxfam, who we've been very pleased to partner with this evening. We do, in the coming year, have a series, one of our brands, if you like, is Trust In. This past year we focused on trust in education. In the coming year we're going to focus on trust in the new sciences, looking at some of the issues around some of the frontier scientific discoveries and technologies that are being introduced and are having a profound effect on the human race from birth to death. We also focus on looking at ethics in business, and we will have a presentation in that series in mid-November. Our annual lecture, which features a distinguished and prominent Canadian, is coming up on October 15th, and you can get more details about all of these programs by signing up to be on our mailing list if you are not already on there. My colleague Christova here, our general manager, will be happy to make sure that you get our mail-outs. I encourage you to complete the evaluation forms on the tables in front of you. We very much value the feedback we receive from the people who participate, and we would very much value your opinion this evening. I want to thank Joanna very much for getting our attention so quickly with such a powerful story of Martina. I suspect that those women probably had to go a very short distance outside their villages at one time, and now are clearly walking miles in footwear that we probably wouldn't even go to the end of the yard in, carrying huge burdens and searching for the resources to feed their families, to see children scooping what is obviously not very clean water, and sort of celebrating the fact that they have water. So much remains to be done through the organizations that focus on this, like the One Drop Foundation that's recently been established, the work of Oxfam itself. So, Joanna, thank you so much for really shining a spotlight onto many of the issues which we need to be considering, and as you have reminded us, the time to consider them is probably yesterday, and certainly now that we only have those 1,999 days left, that really puts it into perspective. So on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you most sincerely, send you away with a typical Nova Scotian piece, which I hope will remind you of our time here, of your time here, and our appreciation for all that you have done this evening, but in the broader sense that you do to provide leadership in this area. We look forward to your continued leadership, and thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Joanna.
Very sweet. Very, very sweet. Very sweet.